Grüß, willkommen in einem aufregendes video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case episode 15 of my equipment series of videos. This video will be covering German anti-tank guns and how they were organised and used. I created these videos in order to assist with my efforts in determining what equipment was used, when and in what formations. This is a specific issue when created equipment data charts or organisational tables for the German Army in World War II for figure gaming or even board gaming. The 2.8 centimetre Schwer Panzerbuchscher 41, or Panzerbuchscher 41, was a German anti-tank weapon working on the squeeze bore principle. Officially classed as a heavy anti-tank rifle, it would be better described and is widely referred to as a light anti-tank gun. The s6e15 41 was used by some motorised divisions and by some Jäger, Gebirgsjäger and Fallschirmjäger units. Some guns were supplied to anti-tank and sapper units. The weapon was employed on the Eastern Front from the beginning of hostilities. The Wehrmacht possessed 183 pieces on the 1st of June 1941 until the end of the war, and saw combat in the North African Campaign and on the Western Front in 1944 and 45. The 2.8 centimetre Schwerpanzerbuchser 41 aus Lichterfeldeffekter 41 was a variant developed for paratrooper units. It used a lightweight carriage without suspension, the wheels were replaced by small rollers, the shield was typically removed. However, while this weapon was a very successful and useful weapon, in the end the factor which brought production of the SPZB-41 to a halt was shortage of tungsten. This shows a paratrooper version in 1942. It looks like a substantial weapon in this photo. Originally named the 7.3 cm Pack L45 and then designed to be towed by horses, it was re-designated the 3.7 cm Pack 35 or 36 when it was equipped with rubber tyres in 1934 and first appeared in combat in 1936 during the Spanish Civil War. The Pack 35 or Pack 36 was initially produced in 1934 or 1935. I'm uncertain how it differed from the Pack 36, that is the Pack 35. My assumption is these weapons were the older 3.7 cm Pack L45, which used solid wheels, which were upgraded by the addition of rubber wheels in 1936, thus its designation Pack 35/36 or Pack 35. The Pack 36, designed to be towed by motor transports, was produced in 1936 with rubber tyres. It was the main German anti-tank gun until 1942 and continued to see service until the end of the war. During the French campaign, it had difficulty with some of the heavier tanks, so by September 1940 was supplied with APCR ammunition, which increased its maximum penetration significantly. However, by November 1944, this kind of ammunition was all but exhausted. One benefit of the 3.7 cm pack was the weapon was easy moving. It was a light and highly mobile anti-tank gun. However, it lacked the punch necessary even when using APCR ammunition to last until the end of the war. The 4.2 cm Pack 41 was a light Panzerabwehrkanonen or anti-tank gun, issued to German airborne units in World War II. The gun was externally similar to 3.7 cm Pack 36, using a modified version of the latter's carriage, but used the squeeze bore principle. Production of this weapon was terminated in June 1942 after delivery of 313 guns. By November 43, 47 remained in service. I have to assume the lack of tungsten was the main reason production was terminated, as its armour penetration was impressive, even if the range was rather low. The 4.7 cm Pack 141F was the German designation for the French 47mm APX anti-tank gun. I'm a bit uncertain of the exact German designation. My primary sources indicated this is the Pack 141, which was based on the model 1937, yet Wiki indicates the name was 4.7 cm Pack 181F for the model 1937 and 4.7 Pack 138F for the model 1939. According to Wiki, the guns were used in the Atlantic Wall fortification, so may never have been issued to the divisions as mobile anti-tank guns. The guns were still in service when the Allies landed in Normandy in June 1944. The 4.7 cm Pack 36T was the German name for the Czech 4.7 cm version 38 or model 38 anti-tank gun. I have some description issues here as well, as Wiki indicates this was called the Pack 38T, which I find rather odd and I suspect is basically an error. I'm uncertain if this weapon was supplied with any significant numbers of APC rounds, but the round was available in April 1941. There were two versions of this weapon, the early version shown here and the later version shown in the previous image. The barrel had the unique feature of being able to swing 180 degrees so that the barrel lay flat over the trail for transport, and the outer part of the trail could also be folded inward to reduce its size. The 5cm Pak 38 L60 or 5cm Panzerabwehrkanonen 38 L60 was a German anti-tank gun of 50mm caliber. After the Spanish Civil War, the German authorities started to think that a new anti-tank gun would be needed, even though the 3.7cm Pak 36 had proven to be very successful. They asked Rheinmetall Bosch to produce a new and more capable anti-tank gun. They first designed the Pak 37 in 1935, but the German authorities did not approve it because of its low capabilities. Rheinmetall Bosch were forced to create a new gun under the designation Pak 38, which fitted a new and longer L60 barrel and was approved for mass production in 1939. The Pak 38 was first used by the German forces during the Second World War in April 1941. When the Germans faced Soviet tanks in 1941 during Operation Barbarossa, the Pak 38 was one of the few early guns capable of penetrating the 45mm sloped armour of the T-34 hull at close range. The APC round, or APCR round, gave it significant additional penetration, allowing it to take on the modern Russian tanks in 1941 and even 1942. The most famous of all the German anti-tank guns was the 7.5cm Panzerwehrkanonen 40. Development of the Pak 40 began after reports of new Soviet tank designs began to reach Berlin in 1939. The 5cm Pak 38 was still in testing at this point, but it appeared it would not be powerful enough to deal with these new designs, which turned out to be the truth or accurate. The project was initially given low priority, but following the invasion of the USSR in 1941 and the appearance of heavily armoured Soviet tanks such as the T-34 and KV-1, it was given an increased priority. The first pre-production guns were delivered in November 1941. In April 1942, the Wehrmacht had 44 guns in service. By 1943, the Pak 40 formed the bulk of German anti-tank artillery. The 7.5cm Pak 41 was one of the last German anti-tank guns brought into service and used in World War II. It was notable for being one of the largest anti-tank guns to rely on the Gelicht principle, the squeeze-ball principle basically. When first introduced, the 7.5cm Pak 41's performance would seem to indicate that it may supplant the Pak 40 as the standard issue anti-tank guns for the Wehrmacht. However, the emergent shell velocity tended to drop dramatically over long range, and accuracy and penetration suffered as a consequence. This factor, along with the growing shortage of tungsten, which was needed for the gun's special ammunition, would ensure that only 150 Pak 41s would ever be produced. The Pak 42 is an anti-tank gun based on the Pak 40, but with a 70cm gun barrel added, similar to the one on Panther L70. As a result, it combined Pak 40's low silhouette and high mobility with fairly good penetration power. Historically, this gun was installed on the young Panzer IV and Panther tanks, but there isn't any good source mentioning that there was a towable version of the gun. The one source I found indicates 253 were produced, but this is a little bit suspect, so I'm not even certain if this gun actually existed, or if it did exist, if it was ever issued. The Pak 97/38 or 7.5cm Panzerabwehrkanonen 97/38 was a combination of the barrel from the French Canon D75 model 1897, fitted with a Swiss Solthron muzzle brake and mounted on the carriage of the German 5cm Pak 38, and could fire captured French and Polish ammunition. The main ammunition fired was heat. 2,854 pieces were delivered in 1942, 858 more followed in 1943. The Pak 97/38 reached the battlefield in the summer of 1942. Despite moderate effectiveness and a violent recoil, it remained in service until the end of the war. The scale of use can be illustrated by the ammunition used: 37,800 heat shells in 42, 371,600 in 1943. On the 1st of March 1945, the Wehrmacht possessed 149 Pak 97/38s and FK-231F guns, although only 14 were employed by frontline units. The Pak 36R or Panzerabwehrkanonen 36 Rashish was based on the Soviet 76mm divisional gun M1936 F-22. The Pak-36R saw combat on the Eastern Front and in North Africa. The gun was actively used in both anti-tank and field artillery roles until the end of the war. As late as March 1945, the Wehrmacht still possessed 165 Pak-36Rs and Pak-39Rs. The scales of use can be illustrated by the amount of ammunition consumed: 49,000 AP and 81,070 subcaliber AP shells in 1942, and in 1943, 151,390 shells. The Pak-39R, or Panzerabwehrkanonen 39 Rashish, was based on the Soviet 76.2mm divisional gun M1939 F-22/USW. Later in the war, the Soviet USV and s6e 76mm divisional guns were also converted. I've never actually found any specific picture of this weapon in German service, how I suspect this designation never officially existed, perhaps, or that instead it may have been an unofficial name used to differentiate the M36 from the M39 Russian 76.2mm gun in German service. The picture here is, if it was in German service, was an FK rather than a PAK, that is a field cannon. The POR 600, or Panzerabwehrwerfer 600, officially designated HH-63, was a lightweight anti-tank gun that used the high-low-pressure system to fire hollow charge warheads. In 1945, it was used operationally by the Wehrmacht in small numbers. Only about 250 were produced before the war's end. Some 260 guns and 34,800 rounds of ammunition was completed from December 44, with 81 guns delivered to the troops in January 45 and 155 listed on the 1st of March 1945. Plans had called for production of 1,000 guns, 4 million anti-tank and 800,000 explosive shells per month. That never occurred. The 8.8cm Raketenwerfer 43 Papchin was an 88mm caliber reusable anti-tank rocket launcher. The weapon was fired from a small two-wheel gun carriage which fired a percussion-primed, rocket-propelled, fin-stabilized grenade, RPZB GR4312, with a shaped charge warhead, basically a heat round. Approximately 3,000 units were completed from 1943 to 45. It was made in much smaller numbers than either the Panzerschreck, which was based on the American bazooka rocket launcher, or the Panzerfaust, which was a disposable anti-tank recoilless rifle. This is partially because it was realized that a simple hollow tube with an ignition device was all that was needed to launch the 88mm rocket, rather than an elaborate miniature artillery piece with carriage and breech. Due to the carriage and better sights, the accuracy was better, and the range more than double than that of the Panzerschreck, but it simply wasn't worth going down this particular path. The Pak-43 was the most powerful anti-tank gun of the Wehrmacht to see service in significant numbers. Originally designed to use a highly effective cruciform mount, delays in production of this mount caused this interim solution to be created, which used a more traditional carriage. The Pak-43/41 proved heavy and awkward to handle in the mud and snow of the Eastern Front, and gunners referred to the Pak-43/41 as the barn door, a reference to the size and weight of the gun. Nonetheless, the improvised Pak-43/41 proved an effective substitute for the Pak-43 until sufficient numbers of the more complex cruciform mounts could be manufactured to replace it in service. The primary intended version of the Pak-43 was based on the highly effective cruciform mount, which offered a full 360-degree traverse and a much lower profile than the ubiquitous anti-aircraft 8.8cm Flak 37, which was used in anti-tank roles sometimes. There were 578 88mm Paks in German Army service on the 1st of October 1944 and 829 Pak-43s on the 1st of January 1945. The Pak-43 was initially developed around 1942, following observations made about the use of the Flak 18 as an anti-tank gun in North Africa. Firstly, the weapon's anti-air carriage gave it a particularly large profile and made it a target for ground troops and air attacks. And secondly, the transport methods required were quite cumbersome. To correct this, Krupps decided to build a weapon that kept the profile very low, similar low-profile nature of the other anti-tank guns, such as the PaK-38, or mimicked it, and turn it into a 88mm weapon that was as effective as the Flak-18. The result of this was the creation of the PaK-43. Now we move to a really ridiculously large anti-tank gun. The choice for 128mm caliber anti-tank gun was made because of the availability of tooling due to the use of this caliber for naval weapons and also anti-aircraft weapons. This was a very powerful anti-tank weapon, but was very heavy and difficult to move around. The German army came upon the Soviet 122mm field guns and issued a requirement for a similar weapon. Development initially concentrated on a field gun known as the Canon K-44. However, once heavier Soviet tanks such as the IS-2 started to appear, the design requirements were altered to include an anti-armor role. Let's now look at where these anti-tank guns were actually deployed. The German Infantry Division had anti-tank guns in 3 locations, a company-sized formation attached to each infantry regiment, and 3 company-sized formations in the anti-tank battalion. The lighter guns normally were with the infantry and the heavier guns under the division. These consisted of 12 weapons each, starting with the 3.7cm anti-tank gun and by early 1943 consisting of the 5cm anti-tank gun. Some sources indicate the 3.7cm remained in the infantry regiments until well into 1943. In addition, a 3-gun section was attached to the reconnaissance battalion, which was exclusively 3.7cm. In Russia, these formations slowly disappeared and were not in the August 1943 structure at all. In 1943, the reconnaissance battalion, within the infantry division, was gone, and the anti-tank companies were increasingly being armed with the 7.5cm anti-tank gun. In 1944, the number of anti-tank guns attached to the infantry regiment was reduced to 3, with the 5cm PaK-38 being reasonably common. I suspect this was due to a lack of guns to equip the new divisions being formed in early to mid-1944. In the latter periods, the Germans raised a very lightweight infantry division, which only possessed a single company of anti-tank guns. Finally, the Volksgrenadier divisions had their anti-tank company reduced to 9 guns each. In 1939 to 1940, the motorised divisions followed the same infantry divisional structure, except they only possessed 2 companies in each anti-tank battalion. In 1941, their only change was the addition of a single anti-tank gun in the motorcycle reconnaissance battalion. The motorised division began to receive 5cm anti-tank guns reasonably early, and these, at least initially, were mixed in with the 3.7cm anti-tank guns. By 1942, most, if not all, of the anti-tank guns in the anti-tank battalions were 5cm. The 3.7cm, as with the infantry, remained with the infantry regiments until sufficient 5cm guns became available to replace them. In 1943, the Panzergrenadier formations were created, and this represented a high watermark for the anti-tank gun. Each regiment had a full company of 3.7cm anti-tank guns, as well as a support section of 3 guns. In addition, each battalion had a section of 3 guns. The anti-tank battalion had a company, and the armoured reconnaissance battalion had a section of 3 guns. Most would have been 7.5cm, although some 5cm anti-tank guns could still exist. In 1944, the number of guns reduced dramatically, the regiments lost their anti-tank company, and the battalions lost their anti-tank sections. If an armoured reconnaissance battalion was present, this would have retained its anti-tank guns. The Panzer divisions were well equipped with anti-tank guns. In 1939 to 1940, each motorised battalion had a section of 3 anti-tank guns, as did the motorcycle battalion and armoured reconnaissance battalion. The bulk of the guns were in the anti-tank battalion, which had 3 companies of 12 guns. In 1941, the motorised battalions lost their anti-tank guns, and these were moved under the motorised regiment, but otherwise was identical in terms of total numbers. Some 5cm anti-tank guns were being issued in 1941, and by 1942 each Panzer division had a reasonable amount of these effective weapons. A quick observation: while this T-O-N-E implies the motorised divisions received the 5cm anti-tank guns first, I feel this is unlikely. In most armies, the newer weapons were issued to the specialist anti-tank battalions, which could then be allocated out as required. I feel this is the correct story. On the other hand, the scenario shown here is not impossible, so my gut feel may be incorrect. In August 1943, a major reorganisation occurred. While the Panzergrenadier regiments contained an anti-tank section of 3 guns, the Panzergrenadier battalions now had a section of 3 guns allocated to them as well, which returned the structure back to the 3940 AUG, although in this case there is a saving of 3 guns, which may have been the real reason they went down this path. The motorcycle battalion had disappeared. In September 1944, the Panzer Division changed again, with a reduction in anti-tank gun strength. The anti-tank battalion, which was supposed to be fully propelled, or fully self-propelled in August 1943 to August 44 AUG, now replaced self-propelled tank destroyers with towed guns. I suspect many divisions were not fully motorised, even in that 1 year period, and this simply reflects the reality in the field. Were not fully equipped with self-propelled guns. They just put towed guns in because they had to. I'm a bit amazed the infantry now no longer have any anti-tank guns. On the other hand, they were equipped with anti-tank rocket launchers instead, so that may have been considered sufficient compensation. The basic structure of the anti-tank formations is as follows. The German anti-tank platoons or section consisted of 3 guns. The companies are generally in turn made up of 4 of these platoons. And so this completes episode 15, my equipment series of videos, in this case covering German anti-tank guns. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.